The movie begins with a warning from the main actress, telling us that the narrative is based on true events. We see a video of the genuine Dr. Abby speaking on television at Chapman University about a sequence of incidents that happened in Nome, Alaska, and culminated in an alleged extraterrestrial abduction in October 2000. A reenactment of Abby participates in a hypnosis session with a colleague psychologist, under the fictitious name Dr. Campos, to recollect what actually happened to her. Abby's husband will perishes in a reenactment of events that happened in August 2000, leaving her to care for their 2 children, Ashley and Ronnie. She stands near where her husband has perished, but she can't recall who did it. In addition, Ashley hasn't been able to see anything since that evening, and she fears that if they can't figure out what occurred, she won't ever be able to see again. Campos offers that she take a break after several tries to recall the murderer's face, in the hopes that she may eventually have some understanding of what happened to her. Later, due to Nome's distant location, Abby must travel there by airplane. When she gets there, she records hypnotherapy sessions with patients who talked about having a white owl staring at them while they were sleeping, before something tried to break into their houses. One of her patients, Tommy, claims that this owl has appeared every night this week, after only seeing it once as a youngster. Abby requests that Tommy return the next day at the end of the session, suggesting that it is a remarkable coincidence that numerous other patients have had similar experiences to his. The real Abby then tells Ashley about how her daughter struggles with being teased at school after losing her sight, before picking Ashley up from school. Nevertheless, a detached Ronnie seems to hold his mother solely responsible for everything, particularly his father's passing. The real Abby now agrees with Ronnie that she should be held accountable for Will's passing. Abby takes out a book authored by Dr. Ojusami one evening that also has his name and contact information. She continues by playing recordings of her husband's research and claims that sleep problems have grown common in Nome, but that the underlying cause is still unclear. Moreover, he claims that more than 300 people in the Nome area share the same symptom, which is waking up at about 3 in the morning feeling uneasy and afraid. The next day, Abby starts Tommy's hypnosis session by posing some question. He claims that he had difficulties sleeping last night and spotted the owl again outside his house. In the film of the genuine interview that is aired side by side with the session, Tommy suddenly opens his eyes and shouts violently, smashing the tiny table next to him, while Abby inquires as to what it appears to be. He then abruptly awakens from the hypnosis and stands in shock surveying the destruction he just caused. For some reason, he is hesitant to tell Abby what he just observed. Instead, he is adamant about leaving and promises to bring up the subject again later. That evening, Tommy's wife contacts 911 and reports that Tommy had just pointed a pistol at her. Sheriff August finally makes it to his home after a long delay, where he is holding his wife at gunpoint. Except Tommy is adamantly silent and fires rapidly. As a result, the sheriff summons Abby to the site, which is teeming with police officers. She attempts to calm him down, but he feels that what he is doing now will keep his family from witnessing what he witnessed. He also claims to have remembered everything and wonders what Zimabueter means. Because no one understands what it signifies, Tommy is adamant that Abby cannot assist him at this time. As a result, he his whole family before putting himself to it. Abby is interviewed by the sheriff following the incident, and she does her best to explain the circumstances. He inquires about her hypnosis practice and presses her as if blaming her method for what occurred. The two get into a fight, and Abby responds by bringing up the numerous unsolved murders in Nome. Once they have finished arguing, August commands her to suspend all research on her patients, for their protection. Abby then narrates all she knows into a cassette, to compile all the information on the unknowable predicament. She is uncertain as to whether or not the other hypnosis patients would experience what Tommy did. After discovering what transpired, Campos travels to Nome the next day to see how she is doing. To keep an eye on her, he also decides to remain in the city. The hypnosis session with Scott, who is also one of Abby's patients, begins shortly after. He's curious about what happened to Tommy because they both suffer from sleep conditions. Scott wants to be hypnotized after discovering what occurred, just in case there was something he didn't recall. Campos is brought inside to see the entire session before the hypnosis begins. Scott had the same experience as Tommy, where he spotted the owl last night, except this time it was beige rather than white. He also claims that its eyes were enormous, unlike those of a typical owl. Nevertheless, he abruptly alters his narrative, claiming that there is no owl, and that someone broke into his house without setting off the alarm. Scott looks just as horrified as Tommy does when Abby asks him to wake up. Scott then quickly throws up. Then, without being able to explain its shape, he says that he witnessed something incredible that is not from around here. The only thing that comes to mind, even though it was all in his head, is an owl, even though he is aware that this is not what it was. The voice that seemed to be speaking to him, but could also be heard within his skull, was the hardest part for him. Scott claims that what he witnessed earlier was the worst thing they could have ever imagined, and Abby ends the session, because he is becoming overly emotional and appears frightened. Abby believes that these patients may have been abducted by aliens after learning about the parallels in their experiences, but Campos doesn't appear to agree. Abby's helper comes to the door a short while later and agitatedly requests to hear a tape that she recorded the previous evening. The words she dictated the previous evening are first heard on the audio, followed by the sound of something breaking into her house and assaulting her. In addition, the attacker uses unidentified language. Abby has no recollection of the event, which surprises Campos. In the interview, the real Abby is questioned about whether or not it was her voice, but she is positive that it was not. She attempts to remember what occurred at the time at home, and at last, recalls hearing glass break and seeing a great wave of white light sweep through the windows. Following then, something, or someone, ascends to the second floor and finds her dozing off. Just afterward, she notices a peculiar wound on her shoulder and discovers scratch marks on the wooden floor going to the door, proving she had been dragged across it. After learning these details, Abby attempts in vain to understand the unusual voice by repeatedly hearing it. Thankfully, she recalls the book Ojusami had earlier opened and chooses to call him. Ojusami appears to be an old linguist, who was also a contact of her late spouse. The genuine Abby remembers feeling at ease with the doctor because he simply listened without judging or analyzing, and he even went to Nome to assist her in identifying the cryptic language in the video. Ojusami recognizes Sumerian, the earliest language in human history, after hearing a few faint syllables on the tape. He is perplexed as to how the ancient language emerged in Abby's chamber, and he suspects it did not sound like a human voice. Campos, on the other hand, scoffs at his outlandish hypothesis and stays skeptical. The three of them hastily head to Scott's house when Abby receives a concerned call from Scott's wife. When they get there, Scott is laying in bed, shaking and afraid. He acknowledges that there was no owl and refers to them, but he is unable to recall anything further. Abby glances at his arm and unintentionally notices the enigmatic mark that resembles her own. While still under hypnosis, he abruptly stands up and starts hovering over his bed with his lips open. Before Scott collapses back into his bed, a voice speaking through Scott commands Abby in Sumerian to immediately stop her research. Abby eventually decides to leave Nome with her family, after realizing they are no longer safe there. August, who shows up out of nowhere, informs her that Scott is paralyzed from the neck down. August wants to arrest Abby because he thinks she is at fault, but Campos defends her and supports her account. Instead, August places Abby under constant security inside her home, and a police officer is stationed inside to capture it with a dash camera. The actual Abby states that there are 4 different types, or categories, of extraterrestrial contacts in the interview. The first kind involves spotting a UFO, the second type involves spotting proof of them, such as crop circles or radiation, the third type involves making contact with them, and the fourth type involves aliens kidnapping humans. She thinks Will and all the other missing persons are related to everything that transpired in the city. If this is happening in a little town like Nome, she surmises that similar events must be occurring everywhere in the world. She also believes that the abductees may not have been aware of what had happened to them, since they were essentially made to forget by altering their memories and minds. The police officer notices a laser beam at 3:33 in the morning, beaming on Abby's house. The dashcam video then shows a massive, strange, triangular-shaped object soaring into view as he goes outdoors. Soon after, the picture starts to smear. People are being dragged out of the house while requesting quick assistance. August finally shows up at the location, still frightened from the incident, and asks to watch the video, but it is clear that nothing was captured. As August enters the home, she discovers Abby and Ronnie in a frenzied condition, claiming her daughter was kidnapped through the roof. But an unconvinced August accuses her of taking Ashley hostage and takes Ronnie away from her care. Abby learns that she cannot rely on anybody else to find her daughter, so she must discover a means to communicate directly with the enigmatic aliens. As a result, she travels to Campos's residence to undergo hypnosis in order to reconnect with her daughter. Although Campos and Ojusami are first apprehensive about what she would do, they eventually decide to assist her. When Ojusami is videotaping the session, Campos sedates her and transports her back 2 to 3 days, to when she recorded the dictation. Similar to her other patients, a hypnotized Abby acknowledges seeing an owl, and verifies it was the same bird. However, this time, the owl was grinning at her, and she afterward realized it was not an owl at all. At precisely 3:33 after that, a blue light falls onto her home. She notices large revolving machinery behind her, and mysterious individuals escorting her somewhere in a weird white atmosphere. The gadget then penetrates her shoulder, leaving a mark that she noticed. Abby begins to sigh and levitate just like Scott in the meanwhile. Abby pleads for Ashley to come back, as an extraterrestrial entity contacts her. Before referring to itself as God, the extraterrestrial claims that Ashley will never return. As soon as the confrontation is ended, Campos and Ojusami run up to Abby, who is now asleep, but they also observe something off-screen. As a voice shouts, "Zimabu Eder," the image begins to smear once again, before resolving to reveal that all 3 have vanished. Abby awakens in a hospital a few days later with a fractured neck. While the sheriff awaits her awakening, Campos is by her bedside. She nonchalantly responds that Will was attacked and perished, when August asks how he passed away. To her amazement, August finally confesses that Will had actually used the gun on himself, demonstrating that Abby's thinking had been illogical the entire time. The reenactment comes to an end there. Returning to the present, Abby claims that she, Campos, and Ojasami were taken during the hypnosis session, but have no recollection of what happened. The journalist asks her how people can believe her allegations of extraterrestrial abduction, since she was shown to be deluded about her husband's passing. Abby ultimately admits that she has no option but to think Ashley is still alive, and will one day meet her. Abby bursts into tears as the interview comes to a close. The interviewer will soon be on TV to share some odd real-life facts about Nome. The FBI has made more than 2,000 trips to the city. In the end, what you think is yours to determine, the actress adds. The movie tells us in the epilogue that Campos continues to practice psychology in Alaska, despite declining to take part in the interview. Even though Ojasami supports Abby's account, he declines to take any further action, and became a professor at a Canadian institution. 2 years after the occurrences, August retired. Ronnie and Abby are still not close, and he continues to hold his mother responsible for Ashley's absence. Abby departed Alaska for the East Coast after being exonerated of all allegations brought against her. But her condition has gotten so bad that she now needs constant care. Last but not least, Ashley has never been located.